UPSHOT, Star Legend Book 7, written and narrated by J.J. Green. Part 2, Found. Chapter 1. He hadn't been given time to say goodbye, to his great regret. Patrin would never forget the look on Mam's face when he'd announced his decision to remain with the aliens on their planet. It had seemed an obvious choice. What was a few months or even years of his life in exchange for the lives of everyone aboard the Defiant, including the people who had died? And the aliens promised to stop interfering in human affairs. Who in their right mind would refuse? Yet when he remembered Mam's reaction, he couldn't help thinking he'd made a huge mistake. At least Arthur was here too. That was something. They'd moved to this room in an army barracks as if by magic. He guessed everything the aliens did would seem like magic, though only because they were so much more advanced than humans. Merlin had said he could appear on Earth in an instant, without the use of a starship. Would that be how he would send him back, just like that? He hoped it wouldn't take too long. Mam had said something about time passing differently here. Arthur turned from the window of their little room. "Soldiers are practicing in the yard. They look real, but they must be phantasms, like the knights we fought in the battle." Must be. Patrin, sitting on one of the two bunks, looked up at the older man. "How long do you think Merlin and Morgan will keep us?" He missed Mam and Kayla already, but he was reluctant to admit it. He didn't want to look weak in front of this famous warrior. "There is no telling. Both are whimsical and fickle, Morgan especially so. Even when Merlin was my friend, I couldn't entirely trust him to follow through with his promises. We cannot rely upon any reassurance they give. We are entirely under their power. Perhaps we can only hope they grow bored of us soon and send us home." Patrin swallowed. "Did I do the right thing, sir? I mean, agreeing to stay." Arthur smiled warmly and joined him on the bunk. "Patrin, you must call me Arthur. I have never enjoyed the airs and graces accompanying my kingship. It would please me greatly if we could be more like friendly companions than a king and his squire." Patrin nodded, though he couldn't imagine ever feeling like an equal with this great man. "As to whether you made the right decision," Arthur continued, "there was no decision to be made. Had you refused, you would have died, and so would have all our company. Merlin and Morgan knew this full well. Their proposal had only one possible answer, and you gave it, as would any rational person. Don't concern yourself with doubts. Our predicament is very simple. We must face whatever lies in store for us with brave hearts. That is all." Placing a hand on Patrin's shoulder, he added, "I have only one caveat, my friend, and it is one that you ignored despite my earlier request." "Huh? What's that?" "When we first arrived on this new world, and we were waiting for Merlin or Morgan to meet us, I had a great foreboding, and I mentioned it to you. Do you remember?" Yes." A heavy feeling settled in Patrin's stomach. "I'm sorry. I am glad you have not forgotten. I asked you not to put your life in danger out of loyalty to me, but you did so anyway. I know I went back on my promise, but I was so angry about what Merlin had done to you." Recalling the joust, Patrin gained courage. "And if I hadn't forced him to fight again, we would all have been killed. I am aware of the paradox. I forgive you. I understand why you behaved as you did, but my request stands. I do not know what the future holds or what the beings of this world plan to do to us, but I don't want you to repeat your earlier mistake. I want you to swear to me on the lives of your mother and sister that you will not do such a thing again. You must not risk your life to save mine. Though we may be friends, I am still your king, and I ask you to make this oath to me as your royal sovereign." Arthur's features transformed from those of an affable older man to a solemn, dignified elder. His blue eyes held Patrin's gaze sternly. "I swear, sire, on the lives of my mother and sister." Arthur's face relaxed. "I am satisfied." He rose to his feet and stretched his arms wide. "Merlin has not reinvigorated me, more's the pity. I would not have objected to that particular charm. My age creeps up on me apace, faster than it would naturally. I fear he will not be affording me any protection in the trials to come. But I thought they just wanted to study us." Patrin's vague idea had been that the aliens might examine them or ask them questions. They said they wanted to understand humans better. Returning to the window and resting his elbows on the sill, Arthur replied, "I knew Merlin all my life, and Morgan for most of it. Even so, I doubt I know them well. But if my past experiences of them are anything to go by, their study will not be the serious examination you expect. They are playful creatures, delighting in intrigue, rivalry, and strife. And, as your mother divined, their greatest delight is to see humans desperately cling to life. It is that aspect of us that most interests them, which does not bode well for us, unfortunately. That is the reason I made you swear your oath. I know you are not an oath-breaker." The door opened, and in walked Merlin. No trace remained of the wound Patrin had inflicted when he pierced the alien's throat with his lance. What was the creature made from? Not flesh and blood. He could melt his body into a pool of liquid and make it solid again. He wore a black robe and a close-fitting cap that covered most of his head and short silver hair. He knitted his fingers, his gaze drifting from Arthur to Patrin as he seemed to consider his words. "I must confess, I had relished the prospect of punishing the rude visitors who had turned up at our door uninvited, but now I'm of a different mind. Morgan's idea was inspired. This new game promises to be even more engaging than the last." Patrin stood up. "You said you wanted to get to know us better, not to continue playing with us." Merlin cocked an eyebrow at Arthur. "Your young friend is rather outspoken, is he not? You should rein him in before he gets himself into trouble." "Patrin is his own man," Arthur replied. "He is not under my command, and I endorse his sentiment. If you only plan on continuing your old habit of toying with human emotions, then you are keeping us here under false pretenses." "You know better than to hold me to my word," Merlin said darkly. "Indeed I do, you old fox. If it's to be more of the same, send the boy home. You don't need him." "Ah, if only I could. Morgan would object, unfortunately." Arthur snorted in disgust and returned his attention to the view outside the window. Patrin said, "Maybe there are things you can learn from us, if you're willing." Merlin's lips creased into a thin smile. "Go on, I'm fascinated." Counting the words on his fingers, Patrin said, "Honesty, trustworthiness, integrity." A peal of laughter from the alien interrupted his recitation. "I lived among humans for hundreds of Earth years, far longer than Arthur's lifetime. The characteristics you mention are not as common as you might think. They are certainly not representative of humanity. It's true that not everyone has them, but a lot more than your kind do, that's for sure." "My kind? Who are my kind? What are they? Do you think you know?" When Patrin didn't answer, Merlin yawned, lifting the back of his hand to his mouth. "I am here to tell you what you can expect. It will make things more interesting if you are prepared. Morgan and I have devised some tasks for you to complete. If you perform them to our satisfaction, you may return to Earth." "That isn't what we agreed," Patrin protested. Merlin smirked. "Then file a complaint with the relevant authority." "Oops, I was forgetting. There isn't one." He gave a small cough. "Seriously, the outcome of our scheme will not be significantly different from the agreed purpose of your stay. By observing what you do, we may learn nuances of human psychology we previously overlooked. You see, Carla Orr and her son will be with you. Dissimilarities between your actions and those of the half-breeds may shed light on traits which are uniquely human." "Tasks?" asked Arthur. "Are they dangerous? You know how fragile our bodies are compared to yours. If something were to happen to Patrin—" "You would do what?" "Regardless, Patrin is Morgan's responsibility. She was the one who wanted 2 of you, and the one spouting all that motherhood nonsense." Patrin sank onto the bunk. "Merlin," said Arthur, "I ask you once more, I beg you, return the boy to Earth. I am fully human. I repeat, you have no need to involve another of us in your game." "Need was never my motivation." Merlin left. "Thanks for trying to help," Patrin said, "but I would feel bad if you were here by yourself. And now we know we have to associate with Carla Orr and Perrin." He grimaced. "It would be extra unfair. No one should have to deal with that pair alone. I am quite used to the likes of Carla Orr. Do not fear for me in that regard. I am more concerned that you may not survive this unscathed. Your mother went to great lengths to find you and your sister when you were kidnapped by the Crusaders. I must protect you at all costs, but I am not sure exactly how. I will understand more when the tasks are revealed." Chapter 2. Row upon row and column upon column of buildings ran between them and the horizon, rising and falling, following the lie of the land. Patrin was reminded of the town where he had grown up, except there were no gardens or trees or parks, nothing green at all, and the buildings varied greatly in size and shape. Some rose so tall they disappeared into the clouds. Others spread wide and flat like square pancakes. They were all the same colour, a pale blue that matched the patches of sky between the clouds. They had to be constructed from the same material. The uniformity, despite the different sizes and shapes, was somehow unnerving. The metropolis felt unnatural, though Patrin couldn't put his finger on why. Figures moved between the buildings. Were they people? At the distance it was hard to tell. "What do you think of this place?" Merlin asked. They stood on a hill bordering the city. How they'd arrived here Patrin did not know. One moment he'd been talking to Arthur in the barracks room. The next he was on the hill, the wind stirring his hair. "This is where your people live?" Arthur asked. "One place of many. It reminds me of the cities of Earth." Movement in his peripheral vision caught Patrin's attention. Carla Orr and Perrin had appeared on the slope of the neighbouring hill, accompanied by Morgan Le Fay. "How big do you think it is?" asked Merlin. Arthur replied, "I cannot see its end." "Does it seem a friendly place, safe to traverse?" Turning his silver-haired head, Arthur faced the alien. "Is that the first task? Must we cross the city?" "That would be far too simple and easy." Patrin said, "We have to beat Orr and her son, right?" Merlin smirked. "A pleasant notion. It would certainly add tension to the game." Arthur nudged him with his elbow. Patrin silently remonstrated with himself. They were in deep enough shit as it was without giving the aliens more ideas on how to make their lives difficult. "I will consider it for later exercises," Merlin went on. "Today you must only cross the city, as Arthur guessed, but you must do it before sunset." Patrin's gaze swung to a bright patch of cloud hiding the sun. The star hung halfway between the horizon and its zenith. He didn't know which direction was north. "Is it morning or afternoon?" Merlin's smirk widened. "How long has it been since the Defiant departed?" Arthur asked.
It seems many hours, but I am not hungry or thirsty. Your primitive needs are irrelevant here. The atmosphere nourishes you," Merlin added sarcastically. "You will not need to stop for lunch along the way." "So it's morning," said Patrin. "How long is a day on this planet?" "What an inquisitive young human." On the farther hill, Morgan was speaking with Orr and Perrin, no doubt also outlining the rules of the task. Would she give them additional information? It seemed impossible that the two aliens wouldn't set up some sort of competition between the humans and half-humans. It was exactly the kind of thing they seemed to love. "Is what you're asking us to do achievable?" asked Arthur, his brows lowered. "Why would I set you a task you cannot possibly complete? To tickle your fancy, of course. If you really want to discover what it means to be human, you need only observe us, not play these games. But in honesty, I believe you have no interest in observing humanity. You only want to prolong the game you began when you came to our planet millennia ago. You want—" This time it was Patrin who nudged Arthur. He had a feeling that revealing what they thought about the aliens was unwise. Also, time was getting on. If something important hinged on their success, they should get moving. "So we only have to cross the city before sunset? There are no other conditions?" "That is all. And if we fail, then we shall see what we shall see. Come on, Arthur, let's go." It wasn't only a sense of wariness that compelled him to begin immediately. He was also genuinely curious to enter the city. He was one of the first human beings to set foot on an exoplanet, and not any old exoplanet, but one inhabited by an intelligent extraterrestrial species. The prospect of seeing them up close intrigued him. Arthur appeared troubled, though he followed as Patrin descended the slope. "It might have been wiser to talk with Merlin longer. He could have revealed helpful information. He might have fed us lies, too, to trip us up, just for fun." "That is true." Patrin looked over his shoulder. Merlin was gone. Morgan Le Fay had disappeared as well, and Carla Orr and Perrin were walking down their hill. They stepped into the shadow of a building, a skyscraper so tall its upper floors were invisible, lost in the misty vapour that overhung the place. Square blank windows rose up the facade until they disappeared out of sight. "No glass," Patrin murmured. The rectangular shapes weren't reflective. They were dark and opaque, and they were flush with the outer surface, almost as if they'd been painted on. "Let us hurry," said Arthur. "There will be nothing of interest to see in this place, and we must reach the other side as quickly as we can. Who knows what punishment Merlin may have in store?" He was already striding down the street. Patrin hurried after him. He was also unsure what Merlin might do if they failed. The alien seemed to value the presence of humans on his planet, reversing his earlier reaction when he'd almost killed them. But there was one thing Patrin did not want to lose, and that was the agreement to return him to Earth. Mam had been through enough in her time. He didn't want her heart to break from losing him forever. The thoroughfare was empty. He wasn't sure where Carla Orr and her son had entered the city, but it was somewhere else. Figures were crossing the road at the junction, however. His footsteps slowed as they neared them. There was something odd about the people. He didn't know what he'd been expecting, possibly creatures who looked similar to Merlin and Morgan, but it wasn't this. They weren't wearing clothes or shoes, and they were grey. Arthur strode ahead, his long legs eating the distance, silver mane flowing in the breeze. Patrin broke from his bemusement and sped up his pace. As he reached Arthur, the old king began to transform. His burly body slimmed down and shrank. "Arthur?" "What, Patrin? We must make haste." He didn't slow down. Arthur's clothes disappeared, and in their place grey skin grew, the same as the figures in the distance. Patrin couldn't go on.
He halted, his mouth agape.
"Arthur, stop! You're—"
Arthur must have registered the note of panic in his voice, for this time he halted and turned. But the man who faced Patrin was not his beloved liege. It was a weird creature, naked and hairless. Wide black eyes with no white and no lids slowly blinked. A lipless mouth opened into an O.
"Patrin, what has become of you?"
"What's become of me? What about—" Fear drying up his words, he looked down. 2 long grey featureless limbs had replaced his legs. He lifted trembling hands. 5 fingers had transformed to 4, and the digits were the same colour as the rest of his new body.
"You're the same,"
he blurted.
"What's happened to us?"
Perhaps it was another of Merlin's jokes. Perhaps the shock was intended to slow them down. Whatever the reason for their metamorphosis, there was nothing they could do except accept it and continue on.
"We won't stand out among the citizens of this place now,"
Arthur said.
"I expect Merlin will return us to our former state later. Let us move on."
How many minutes had already passed since they'd entered the city? They ran to the end of the street. A wide avenue traversed it, thronged with grey folk. They varied in height and weight like humans. Some appeared to be children, holding their parents' hands as they walked. The figures spoke to each other, but Patrin didn't know their language. Vehicles also moved along the avenue, 2-wheeled and 4-wheeled. They even had autobuses. Arthur darted across the roadway during a break in the traffic. Patrin followed, but not quite quickly enough, causing a vehicle to brake. The person sitting in it shouted and shook a 4-fingered fist. As they jogged down the next street, Patrin squinted at the sky. The sun wasn't visible above the buildings yet. They passed a window at street level, and he was surprised to see this one was made of glass. Creatures sitting at tables could be seen inside, chatting and eating. Eating? Merlin had said the air contained nutrients, eliminating the need to eat.
"Arthur!"
He wanted to show the king the strange phenomenon. What did it mean? But his newly transformed companion ignored him. Patrin feared he might lose him in the crowd if he didn't keep up. There was little difference between Arthur and the other pedestrians, except for the fact that he was clearly in a hurry. Patrin pushed past a group of the aliens. Was their hairless, bulbous-headed, black-eyed form what Merlin and Morgan really looked like? He ached to stop and try to communicate with one of them. The reason he'd agreed to stay behind was to find out more about this place, but Merlin had deprived him of the opportunity.
"Arthur!"
They'd reached the end of the block. It was not a crossroads. The opposite side of the street held no exit.
"Which way?"
asked Arthur.
"Left or right?"
"Right? I don't think it matters." They jogged down the street, waiting for a lull in the traffic, and then crossed it. Soon an alley opened up. As they ran down it, Patrin spotted another glass window. He couldn't resist the urge to look inside. Grey creatures sat at desks, working on interfaces. Surprise made him stop and stare. First a cafe or restaurant, now an office. What was going on? Was life on this planet so remarkably similar to the way humans behaved on Earth? He wanted to discuss what he was seeing with Arthur, but the alleyway was empty.
"Arthur!"
Patrin flew to the end and peered out. The creatures walked and drove the streets the same as before. The effect was unsettling. Put clothes and hair on the aliens, and they could almost be people. Where had his friend gone? One of the pedestrians was taller and walking faster than the others. Dodging the creatures in his way, Patrin ran to the potential Arthur and grabbed its shoulder. It spun around, and for a fraction of a second, Patrin thought he'd made a mistake. Could this no-nose being really be a king?
"Patrin, is that you? Thank the stars, I nearly lost you. You must keep up. Don't make me remind you again."
The end of a broad street faced them.
"I think this may lead us a long way into this horrible place,"
Arthur said. They ran along the edge of the pavement, avoiding the vehicles and the pedestrians. Arthur had made Patrin go in front to keep an eye on him, presumably. The king had a remarkable ability to focus on a task, regardless of what was going on in his surroundings. Patrin tried to emulate him, but again and again his gaze was drawn to scenes playing out around them. A small version of one of the creatures fell over, and its larger parent picked it up and patted it soothingly. A couple of aliens walking arm in arm suddenly faced each other and pressed their mouths together. Kissing? A grey being halted at the edge of a road and waved at the traffic. One of the vehicles peeled out of the flow and parked, collecting a passenger before moving on.
"This way!"
Arthur shouted. A diagonal thoroughfare led off to the left. Arthur probably thought it would get them across the city faster. Patrin had long since lost all sense of direction. He looked up. The sun peeked over the roof of a tall building. Nearly midday already? He could have sworn less than an hour had passed. But this planet might have a faster rotation than Earth. Merlin had been careful to avoid telling them anything about it. After taking the new direction, they were in shadow, tall constructions looming on each side. For the first time, grey creatures who were running appeared, and they were running directly toward them. The creatures stared as they ran, making eye contact. Another first. Up until now they'd been mostly ignored.
"Do not speak to them,"
Arthur warned.
"I fear they mean to delay us."
Like the rest of the aliens, there was little to tell between them except for their body size. One was nearly as tall as Arthur, the other was shorter and slimmer. The latter's smaller stature made what it did next extra surprising. As it neared Arthur, it diverted its path to come closer to the king. Arthur tried to run around it, but the alien drew back a fist and punched him in the stomach. Clearly taken entirely by surprise, the king gave out an oof and doubled over. Patrin raced to his aid, but the taller alien had made a beeline for him. He ducked and only narrowly avoided the fist that had swung where his head had been. Why were they being attacked? Were the aliens trying to prevent them from reaching their goal? Patrin punched upward, catching his attacker under his chin. His knuckles sank horribly into soft grey flesh. Did these things even have bones? His opponent stumbled and fell. Meanwhile, Arthur had managed to get his assailant into a headlock. "Leave me alone, you bastard," the thing hissed. It spoke English. But wait, Patrin recognized the voice.
"Carla Orr,"
Arthur growled.
"How like you to try to make us fail at our task, even at the expense of your own failure. Let me go. You started this. I've half a mind to twist your head off. These strange new bodies we have may make it possible."
The creature who had swung at Patrin, Perrin Orr, he presumed, was rising to his feet. Patrin kicked his legs out from under him, causing him to land hard on his butt. Except none of them had butts anymore. He pushed Perrin onto his back and put a foot on his chest to keep him down. "If you wait here any longer," Carla said, "you will fail."
"If I set you free, you will attack us again,"
Perrin gasped.
"We won't, I promise. I tried to persuade Mother against it, but she insisted. She said this is what Morgan really wants, for us to make you lose." "She may be right,"
said Arthur.
"All the more reason for me to put an end to your darling parent."
He grabbed one side of Carla's head with his large paw. His fingers sinking into the grey flesh, he dragged it around. Carla screamed.
"Don't do it,"
yelled Perrin.
"I'll make her leave you alone. You won't see us again, I guarantee it."
"Arthur," said Patrin,
"we should give them a chance. They are half-human after all, and they're trapped here. They will never be allowed to return to Earth."
The king didn't relinquish his hold at first, but seconds later he threw Carla Orr to the ground.
Hurry, Patrin!
During the short fight, the sun had surmounted the sky. It shone directly down the road, illuminating the grey figures of Carla and Perrin as they left them behind. They reached the corner and the king slowed down. His breath was coming in short puffs. Patrin was feeling the pace too, yet they seemed nowhere near the edge of the city. Buildings surrounded them on all sides.
Which way?
Asked the king.
I don't know. Let's try down there.
The new direction seemed as good as any. From Patrin's memory of the view of the city and the position of the sun, they would definitely be heading away from the hills. It also felt better to keep moving than to come to a complete halt and try to assess their surroundings. Everything looked the same anyway, oddly Earth-like. As they jogged along, Arthur said,
"You were right to remind me to show pity and mercy. Sometimes, when faced with evil in the guise of Carla Orr, it's easy to forget. I don't know if we did the right thing. I've a feeling it won't be long before we see them again, despite Perrin's promise." "Maybe so, but that would be their fault, not ours."
After a while, Patrin's lungs began to burn. His leg muscles already ached. They'd been running at a fast pace, and he'd grown unfit during his time on the Defiant. Where was the end to the city? They ran on. As his fatigue increased, Patrin began to imagine he could see Carla Orr and her son again amongst the crowd. Any pair unevenly matched in height could be them. Perhaps he did see them, but no more of the grey creatures approached. In fact, they seemed uninterested in the two runners. When the task was over, would Merlin change them back to their original form? Surely he would not allow them to remain like this forever. Was that the reward for success? To become human once more? Was the punishment for failure to remain as they were? How would he live on Earth looking like this? The sun had disappeared from overhead ages ago, and now the light was dimming. Time was running out. His throat was sore from panting, and his legs on fire. He began to long for a glimpse of the city boundary. What lay at the farther edge? More hills? Arthur had been running slower for a while, and Patrin had eased his pace to match the older man. But suddenly the king drew to a complete stop. His hands on his knees and his odd features strained with effort, he squeezed out a few words.
"Go on without me. I cannot run farther." "No way."
Patrin put an arm over Arthur's shoulders, his own chest sucking in huge lungfuls of air.
"You can make it." "I cannot. I am at the end of my strength." "You can walk at least. Let's walk."
Arthur stepped forward slowly.
"There is no point. You must continue alone."
"I won't do it."
"Patrin,"
he wheezed.
"You took an oath, remember?" "I know, but this isn't a life and death situation. We don't know if I'm giving my life for yours by staying with you." They staggered on. Arthur appeared too exhausted to argue. The streets stretched out, lacking any apparent limit. The sky was darkening. "You know," said Patrin, beginning to catch his breath, "I don't think there is an end to this city. I think it goes on forever." "You may be right. It would be exactly the kind of joke Merlin would love." The atmosphere was growing chilly, and a rose tint lit the sky. The endless stream of pedestrians and vehicles was lessening. They turned a corner, one of so many Patrin had lost count. A thoroughfare opened up, similar to all the others. It was as if they were trapped in a gigantic labyrinth with no beginning or end. Then the rose tint above them swiftly faded and was replaced by twilight. They had failed. A figure appeared from nowhere at the end of the street. Clad in his black gown and cap, Merlin smiled superciliously. Arthur and Patrin slowly hobbled up to him. There was no point in trying to avoid their fate, whatever it might be. They were entirely under the creature's control. "Tut, tut, my boys.
Merlin chided.
A good effort, but not good enough. It's time to pay the price.
He lifted a hand dramatically and flicked his fingers upward. Patrin flew into the air. He rose high above the city, through the misty clouds and into the upper atmosphere. He choked in the freezing thin air and flailed about. The icy temperature began to bite. Was this how he would die, asphyxiated and frozen? He began to move sideways. Craning his neck, he saw Arthur following, though the king's head hung down as if he was already unconscious. Dark clouds moved beneath, obscuring the land below. Abruptly, whatever force was keeping him aloft vanished. He plummeted, falling so fast he barely registered his passage through the clouds. A black expanse rushed up at him. He briefly recognized the indistinct forms of waves before he dropped feet first into water and it closed over his head. Somehow the impact didn't kill him. He sank deep. Gradually his momentum slowed and he floated in the depths of the ocean. Up had to be above his head. He kicked, his lungs straining for air. He swam on, but didn't emerge from the water. Everything was forgotten. Arthur, Mam, Kayla and Wright, Earth, Merlin, Morgan, Carla and Perrin all slipped from his mind except for the single focus of being able to breathe. Yet no matter how hard he kicked or how high his arms reached, he couldn't get to the surface. His body rebelled against his control, yearning for sweet oxygen. Finally, exhausted and despairing, his mouth automatically opened. He couldn't help it. He breathed in. Chapter 3. The water penetrated his lungs deeply. He could feel its liquid coolness inside his chest, but for some reason he didn't cough, gag or choke. He exhaled, and slightly warmer water flowed out of his mouth, accompanied by a fountain of bubbles. His feelings of panic and fear receded. He wasn't losing consciousness. He wasn't dying. He hung in the misty dark, confused. Experimentally, he filled his lungs and then breathed out. The water flowed in and out as naturally as air. Was he actually dying, and this was a projection of his fading mind? He didn't think so. After all, he and Arthur had been transmogrified into strange alien creatures only a few hours ago. Was he still a strange alien creature? He couldn't see a thing. He was either too deep or the water was too murky. He felt for one of his hands with the other. 4 fingers and a thumb. He was human again. Except not quite. Not unless you counted the ability to breathe water, which had never been a human capability, not naturally, nor even by design, as far as he was aware. Merlin had altered his body again, the same as he'd made him grey and hairless and given him a bulbous head and fully black eyes. What was the point of this new transformation? Where was he even? He swam a few strokes aimlessly. The direction of the surface didn't matter now. If he reached it, he didn't know if he would be able to breathe air. Was this a new task? And if so, what exactly did he have to do? Merlin was probably observing him right now and laughing at his bewilderment. Morgan too. The only positive side to this new state of affairs was that he remained alive. No, there were 2 positive sides. If he was alive, so was Arthur. Was he around here somewhere? Without thinking, he tried to shout the king's name, but only a burst of warm water came out of his mouth, without a gurgle or a bubble. Speaking wouldn't work in this undersea realm. Could he find Arthur by touch? He reached out with his hands and feet, but encountered nothing. He thought back to his brief time in the sky, but he couldn't recall seeing what had happened to his companion. He swam some more slow, lazy strokes, not caring where he went, but needing to do something. The exhaustion of his long run through the city seemed to have entirely disappeared, as if when giving him the ability to breathe underwater, Merlin had also alleviated his fatigue. Or perhaps a long time had passed without him noticing and he'd recovered. According to what Merlin had told them and the challenge he'd set, they'd failed the first task. Was this the punishment? A burst of fear shot through him. Was this experience going to be never-ending? Was he to spend the rest of his life swimming alone in this abyss? But he couldn't believe it. He could not believe that Merlin, so bored with his own existence that he engineered strife and mayhem on a whole planet just for his amusement, would pass up the opportunity to have some more fun. Sooner or later, something would happen. Silver flashed in the darkness. I thought so. Are you listening in on my mind, you nasty old goat? A shape was moving toward him, sliding through the water like an indolent ripple. It had to be reflecting light from somewhere. Patrin gazed in the direction he assumed was up, and then all around. A faint glow shone in the distance, a band of light resembling the Milky Way.
Patrin?
Though the voice sounded in his head and not his ears, he recognized it immediately.
Arthur? I've found you at last. I guessed it must be you. Merlin has altered us once more, but you are the only other thing I've encountered.
Where are you? As Patrin asked the question, he knew the answer. The silver creature had swum closer and now floated in front of him. It was the largest eel he ever saw, except it was narrow and its scales shone like liquid mercury. The head was flat, with holes for ears, and it held a gaping, many-toothed mouth and shark eyes.
What do you mean, Merlin altered us?
He reached for his other hand, as he had before, only to feel a sinuous, muscular wave pass through him. His hands were gone.
Shit, I hate this. What's the point of morphing us into these different life forms? I have come to know Merlin well over the years. I believe nearly everything he does is for his amusement. I have to agree. What now? I hoped Merlin might have told you. I haven't seen him either.
How to point when you don't have hands?
There's something over there.
He nodded in the direction of the band of light.
Then let us investigate.
Somehow, what would have been the movement of Patrin's legs was translated into moving in the undulating motion of a sea snake. He propelled himself with Arthur toward the light. Might it in fact be the Milky Way shining down through the water? But then he recalled he was far from Earth, and the band of stars might not shine in this sky. The Defiant had travelled a long way, slipping faster than light speed through dark paths of space-time. This planet could be closer to the core of the galaxy and part of that gleaming ribbon in Earth's night sky. But what grew clearer the closer he swam was not the glimmer of celestial bodies, but a fiery furnace, oozing lava, turning the water hazy with intense heat. Great gaseous gouts belched from a jagged wound in the ocean floor. Brilliant colours, red, orange, pink, purple and yellow, etched the edge of the fissure and spilled out onto rocks and sand.
I know this place,
Arthur said,
and I cannot go there. I will not.
The king turned and began to swim away.
Arthur, where are you going? What do you mean you know this place? How do you know where we are? There's no way you were here before.
Patrin swam after him. Merlin must have sent them to the bottom of the ocean to perform the second task. He might not have revealed it yet, but that had to be the reason for their fish bodies.
Arthur, wait!
He caught up to the king and matched his speed.
Stop! Talk to me!
Arthur's swimming slowed.
You must know it too. Though you are from a different time than I, all humans know of it. But I don't. I really don't. I don't understand. It is hell. How do you not recognize it? I do not wish to witness the eternal torment of human souls.
It's... Patrin halted. The king swam on.
It isn't hell, Arthur. It can't be. We're on an alien planet.
Patrin set off again.
I get what you mean, but hell is an idea in human religions. I don't know what that place is, but there's no way it's...
When his companion didn't respond, Patrin went on.
Please, we have to go there. If we don't try to complete this task, we might never go home. I'll never see my family again. We have already failed a task. I don't think it makes any difference whether we attempt this one. But still, what else can we do? Swim around underwater forever?
The sea creature that was Arthur slowed down and then turned in a smooth arc.
I will attempt the task so that you might see your mother and sister again, but I fear it will come to nothing.
They returned to the gash in the ocean floor. The water around Patrin's body grew warmer the closer they swam. At some point it would grow unbearably hot and his skin would begin to cook. They couldn't go right up to the fault line. That was what it had to be. He'd learned about plate tectonics at school. This superheated crack had to be the line where two plates met. Either they were pulling apart or pushing together, and in the gap magma could leak out. So this planet was similar to Earth in that way? Or perhaps it was just a conjuring of Merlin or Morgan's mind.
There are beings!
Arthur exclaimed.
It is hell! I was right!
Patrin scanned the cleft. It was hard to see anything in the glare, but he caught sight of movement. There were creatures here, as Arthur had spotted. They were mottled brown, well camouflaged against the seabed they crawled over. Some kind of arthropod, they marched steadily toward the fault line, steadily and irrationally. Why would any life form choose to approach the deathly heat? Then he saw better what was happening and understood Arthur's deduction. The creatures were not choosing their fatal path, they were being driven along it by others of their kind, jabbing them with long steel needles. The torturers or executioners surrounded their victims, cutting off all avenues of escape. It did look like a scene from hell. Save them. The words had not been spoken inside Patrin's mind. They had arrived externally, echoing through the water. They were unmistakably Merlin's. Save the creatures who were about to die? How? Patrin asked. Predictably, no answer came. Arthur said,
Another impossible task. I begin to wonder if we have been in hell ourselves all along. If so, there is no doubt I deserve it. I have committed enough sin in my life. But you are innocent, Patrin. That is why you succeeded in the joust. You are pure and noble of heart. You should not be here.
Patrin didn't know what the king was talking about. It was hard to relate to someone who had lived thousands of years ago, and he was pretty sure it had been Mam distracting Merlin that had allowed him to win the joust, not his purity or nobility.
I am here, though, so I want to try. Try we must. There is no alternative, and perhaps Carla Orr and her son may arrive soon to complicate our efforts.
They swam closer, slipping through the water in unison. The heat began to grow uncomfortable. A burning, stinging sensation came from all over his body. Even his eyes hurt. The creatures holding the spikes had noticed them. As their gazes turned upward, their victims took their chance and tried to break through the ranks of stabbers. The line of marchers was breaking up. Maybe a distraction was all that was needed, and the captives would escape without further intervention. But then the torturers realized what was happening and pricked their escapees back into line. Trying to ignore his increasing discomfort, Patrin glided downward. The heat from the vent was becoming unbearable. He dove at a group of needle-wielding creatures, snapping at them threateningly. They aimed their weapons at him to fend him off. Arthur harried the opposite side of the line. He was even closer to the heat source. Patrin didn't know how he could stand it. A batch of prisoners broke free and scrabbled hastily over the ocean floor. Patrin continued to distract their captors, feinting left and striking right, the needle points barely missing him. Arthur was not faring so well. Liquid spurted from his side, blood, no doubt, but in the low light it looked black as oil. Patrin wanted to go to his aid, but if he left his position, the escapees would soon be rounded up again.
"Arthur, come here! I will protect you! I must fulfill the task. The task doesn't matter. We can do it together."
His statements didn't make any sense, but avoiding the jabs and seeing Arthur wounded was confusing him.
"Come to my side. I must—" "Ah!"
A third wound opened in the king's side. Patrin abandoned his location. The alien creatures could go to hell as far as he was concerned. He would not allow Arthur to be hurt.
"Go back! You cannot save me!"
Perhaps through loss of blood or due to the pain from the scalding water, Arthur was sinking closer to his attackers. The prisoners they'd been herding to their deaths were fleeing, but they were ignored in favour of killing the great fish creature.
"Arthur! Go back! Leave Patrin!"
The king's voice was growing quieter.
"You have completed the task. You have saved some of these strange beings. Leave. Go home to your family."
"No!" He rushed forward. A sharp pain pulsed from his thigh, except it could not be his thigh. He'd been wounded.
"Patrin!"
Arthur's tone was solemn.
"Remember your oath."
The king reached the ocean floor. The stabbing creatures closed in. Patrin turned from the scene, unable to watch. As he did so, he caught sight of the prisoners he had freed. They hadn't run away. They had returned and were attacking the jabbers, grappling with them and tearing the spikes from their claws. As soon as they were armed, they poked their former executioners, driving the needle tips into joints and eyes, forcing them closer to a fiery death. The tables had turned. The condemned had become slayers. Nothing had changed. His effort had been useless, and Arthur was dead. Chapter 4. Cool air bathed his skin, and the light was unbearably bright. Patrin shut his eyes. He was lying on a hard surface, cold and smooth like marble. If he was no longer in water, was he human again? Opening his eyes to a slit, he lifted a hand above his face. The familiar colour of his skin, the digits, the fine hair, the scuffed knuckles from the battle, all these things warmed his heart. But then a terrible memory struck. In his mind's eye he saw again the sea animal that had been Arthur, set upon by stabbing creatures. He squeezed his eyes shut, and tears escaped from beneath the lids. Arthur was gone. His mentor, his friend, the father he'd never had, his king, was dead. Gaping sorrow opened up in his chest, but it was quickly replaced by fury. Arthur's death had been Merlin's fault. If he hadn't set the tasks, if he'd just allowed everyone from the Defiant to leave, the King of the Britons would still be alive. He would not be a corpse lying at the bottom of the ocean, not even in his natural form. Patrin leapt to his feet. Wherever and whatever this new place was, he would seek Merlin out and kill him. "Now then," said a smooth voice, "be careful." Patrin spun around, trying to find the speaker. His eyes were gradually adjusting to the glare. A tall figure in a dark robe stood before him. His hands jerked out and grasped Merlin's neck. "You killed him, you bastard!" The neck collapsed beneath his fingers like a bath sponge. He half expected to see water or blood flow out, but nothing appeared, and Merlin only smiled condescendingly.
"Press away, young man, press away. The sensation is quite pleasant."
Patrin released his hold and clenched his fists impotently. He imagined smashing Merlin's face in, throwing him to the ground and stomping on his head, ripping out his entrails with his bare hands and stuffing them in his mouth. But the alien would not be harmed. His elastic body would only reform to its previous shape. Merlin's eyebrow lifted.
"You seem upset, Patrin. Tell me, what is it that angers you?" "Fuck off! I'm not telling you anything. You'll only feed off my emotions like the parasitic creep you are."
Another memory hit. He was on the battlefield again, and Merlin and Morgan were bargaining with Mam and Wright. One of the brothers from West BI, the youngest one, who had been killed in the battle, walked out of a tent alive.
"Bring him back to life! Bring Arthur back! I know you can do it!"
The corner of Merlin's lip lifted.
"What makes you think I have not?"
Huh? Could it be true? Patrin swiveled again. Arthur was lying only a few meters away, unconscious, but his chest rose and fell. Patrin ran to his side and collapsed to his knees, resting his hands on the broad chest to reassure himself that what he was seeing was real.
"What? No thanks? Not a word of gratitude?"
Merlin had moved silently closer.
"We did your tasks. You've played with us enough. Let us go. Send us back to Earth, you evil maniac." "Absolutely not. The terms of your stay here were not specified, and neither were the number of tasks you must undertake. You could be here a very long time. You were never interested in learning about humans, were you? You just wanted a couple of us on hand to torture for fits and giggles, right?"
Patrin rose to his feet. He stood a head taller than Merlin. Making use of his additional height, he loomed over the slim alien, bringing his face so close their noses were almost touching.
"You're disgusting and pathetic. Your life is so meaningless, so empty of love and friendship, so lacking in purpose. You have to torment other species just to give yourself a reason to carry on. You might look down on humans, but the poorest, weakest, most disadvantaged of us has a life full of more emotion and significance than yours is or will ever be. You're a waste of space, a blight, a void that only takes and never gives anything back."
Merlin's gaze was fixed on his, but his expression was inscrutable.
"I don't care what you do with me. I don't even care what you do with Arthur. We've already lived more than you ever did or ever will. Kill me now. Kill us both. I'll die knowing that you didn't win. I've won because my mam, my sister, Arthur and TJ loved me. Who loves you, huh, Merlin? Who loves you?"
"Touching," Merlin murmured in his usual sarcastic tone. Yet Patrin was sure he detected a tremulous note, as if the alien was rattled. Had he really unnerved him? It was hard to believe. He'd only spoken from his heart, but as the word left his mouth, he'd known every one was true.
"But,"
the alien continued,
"though you seem intent on dying, that was not part of my plan. A single task remains. Will you attempt it?"
Somewhat deflated, Patrin replied,
"Only one more. What is it? Look around. Can you guess?"
The surroundings hadn't fully registered on Patrin. At first he'd been too blinded by the high-intensity light. Then he'd been too worried about Arthur and angry at Merlin. He broke eye contact with the alien and assessed this new place. The floor confirmed his first impression. It did appear to be made from a substance like marble. White, smooth, and faintly shiny, it spread in all directions until it reached. A white vapour obscured the farthest reaches of the floor. They were outside. The sky was entirely clear, and the sun was a brilliant orb too bright to behold. The air was chilly, and it felt thin. It struck him that he couldn't see any other parts of the landscape. No hills or fields, no rivers or oceans.
Are we high up? Very high up. We are higher than the highest mountain on your planet. Naturally, I am helping you to breathe. That white stuff in the distance, those are clouds? Well spotted. Remember this. There are no barriers to prevent you falling, and nothing to indicate the edges of the platform.
Arthur groaned and lifted a hand to his head. Patrin moved to his side and squatted down.
How are you feeling? Are you okay?
The king opened bleary eyes and then quickly shut them again.
The light's bright here. You'll get used to it in a minute. Thank the stars you didn't die. Merlin will wait until he is fully ready before he kills me. Our most recent challenge was not the time. We only have one more task, then we can go home.
Arthur's eyes opened again and he sought Patrin's face.
Only one? What must we do?
Patrin turned to ask Merlin, but the platform was empty. The alien had vanished.
Damn, he's gone. He didn't say. Of course he didn't. Help me up.
When Arthur was standing, they surveyed the new place together.
We're up in the clouds and there's nothing to stop us from falling,
Patrin informed him.
So we have to be careful.
Arthur shrugged.
If Merlin wishes, he could catch us, or he could just let us fall. Exactly. Do you think that's the task, to avoid falling off? That seems too easy. Perhaps we must cast ourselves to our supposed deaths. Who knows? There is no telling.
They walked.
I am glad I am in human form,
said Arthur.
I did not enjoy being a fish. Me neither.
Patrin didn't ask him what it felt like to die. He didn't want to remind Arthur of the experience, or, in truth, to hear about it. He would find out one day himself, hopefully a very long time from now.
I saved some of those creatures, you know. I created a diversion so they could escape. Well done. You succeeded in the task, and you may have saved our lives. I don't think so. The creatures I saved didn't run away. They turned on their executioners. They stole their weapons and forced them into the fiery place instead. So no good came from your intervention? None at all as far as I could tell, except maybe the worse of the two types of creature died? I don't understand it. But then, nothing here makes any sense. Who were the beings in the city? Why did Merlin set us the challenge to cross it in a day?
The first task was impossible, and the second one was pointless.
I see something.
Arthur pointed ahead. A tiered structure rose from a white base, like a small cone-shaped tower. Wreathed in mist, it was hard to make out. But then a breeze turned the vapour to threads, revealing a structure that held 6 seats. 3 made up the triangular base, 1 at each point. 2 seats were on opposite sides above, and a single seat formed the tip. The seats at the base and middle tiers faced outwards. The person sitting at the tip looked at them directly. It was Morgan Le Fay. She stood up, took a step forward, and floated to the floor.
Arthur, Patrin, how nice to see you. Have you been enjoying yourselves? Has Merlin shown you a good time?
She winked.
What am I saying? Of course he hasn't. He's far too dark and twisted.
Patrin saw no reason to gratify her with a reply. Besides, he'd just recognised the people sitting in the middle-tier seats. His gaze locked with Perrin awe, and then slid to his mother. After a brief discussion, they clambered down. Without Morgan's ability to gracefully float, they were forced to climb onto the backs of the seats below, disturbing their occupants, 2 grey-haired women and a grey-haired man. Perrin asked,
"What was your second task?" "We're not here to compare notes," Patrin retorted.
"What do you get if you win?" asked Carla.
Will you return to Earth? I'm returning to Earth anyway.
He turned to Morgan.
That's what you promised, right? I want to go there now, with Arthur. My mam will be worried about me. You said I wouldn't be here long. You didn't say anything about these bullshit tasks and challenges.
You haven't been here long, Morgan replied slyly.
I want to go back with them,
demanded Carla.
I?
Perrin glared at her.
Don't you mean we? Neither of you is going anywhere,
Morgan snapped.
Except...
Her attention turned to the cloudy haze. One of the grey-haired figures at the base of the tower rose to her feet and hobbled toward them.
Who's that?
Patrin asked.
Who do you think?
Carla snapped.
Another one of them.
The woman was ancient, looking as old as Arthur should have looked. Her head was little more than a skull, wispy strands of white hair clinging to it. Her white robe hung from her skeletal body like a funeral gown. Yet as she shuffled closer, she grew younger. Her hunched body straightened, lustrous dark brown hair sprouted from her head and cascaded down her back, and her clouded eyes grew bright and vital. By the time she reached them, she resembled a woman only just out of adolescence, her skin plump and wrinkle-free.
You are the humans.
She faced Arthur.
You are the oldest, though the time of your existence is equal to only a single exhalation of my kind. I am the oldest, the king confirmed. Who are you and your people? Why have you plagued my world?
Patrin had a sense of kindred spirits meeting for the first time. This new alien didn't regard Arthur with the same arrogance and haughtiness as Merlin and Morgan did. She looked at him with an expression of respect. Patrin wasn't sure why. Perhaps she perceived the same things in Arthur that so many others did, that maybe Merlin had seen long ago.
We visit many new worlds and new species. It adds interest to our lives. Who cares about that? Patrin snapped. What gives you the right to interfere in human affairs? What gives anyone the right to do anything? What are rights? Who decides them and upholds them? These questions have no answers. Believe me, we know. We have considered them for longer than your planet has existed. There is no meaning to life. There are no rights or wrongs. Everything is relative. If you believe that, why even bother going on? If there's no point to anything, why not kill yourselves? Do you think we have not tried?
It was not the response Patrin was expecting. He'd anticipated some woolly reasoning, justifying their appalling behaviour. Arthur said,
Please, explain.
The explanation is simple. We cannot die. We do not grow old and wither as your species does. We can alter our forms, travel through the vacuum of space without protection, dive into stars and emerge unscathed. We can be exploded into atoms, but eventually the atoms will find each other, coalesce, and become whole again.
How long have you been like this?
Arthur asked.
There must have been a time you were mortal, like us.
Logically, there must, but it was so long ago we have no record of it. We do not even know the appearance or anatomy of our original form. At some point in our evolution, we must have discovered how to put a stop to aging. Then we learned how to shapeshift. Perhaps after that, perhaps before, we also devised a method for making ourselves indestructible. At the time, these medical developments must have seemed amazing, but there has been a bitter legacy.
Boredom,
said Patrin. And all that comes with it, apathy, lethargy, indifference. We long to feel, we lust to care about something, anything. We desire deeply to believe that one thing holds more importance than another, as you do. But we cannot care about anything anymore.
Those grey creatures in the city,
said Patrin.
who were they? Have you trapped another life form here as well as us?
The people in the city are my kind. I may have been one of them. That place is modelled on your planet. We sometimes go there to mimic the way you live, hoping to experience even a sliver of your feelings.
What about the life forms on the ocean floor?
Patrin pressed.
Don't tell me that was your species too.
Being forced to an agonized though brief death is one of the few ordeals that registers in our emotions. While they had been talking, Morgan stood by listlessly, looking disinterested. Occasionally she would throw a glance at Perrin and then beyond him to the cloudy expanse. Merlin stepped out of the mist.
Arthur, I see you have found your fellow humans.
Half humans, Morgan corrected. She placed an arm around Perrin's shoulder affectionately. He grimaced but did not remove it.
We have been learning about your people,
Arthur replied to Merlin.
I must say, despite all the harm you have caused and the terrible deeds you have committed, pity for you stirs in my heart. You pity me? He's right,
Patrin said.
I pity you too, all of you. My life is rich, yours is empty. I would rather be human, even though my time is over in a blink of an eye in your terms, than endure the living hell of your existence.
What are you doing? Perrin yelled. Morgan was wrestling one of his arms behind his back, evil delight wreathing her features. Though she was small and slight, she was surprisingly powerful. She easily completed her move. Perrin was helpless, his face contorted with pain. She pushed him toward the edge.
Shit, she's going to throw him off.
Morgan was doing it for fun. She had clearly grown bored of the conversation and wanted a small diversion. If she did push Perrin over the edge, she could save his life regardless. But would she? Would Merlin or any of the others? They probably envied Perrin's ability to die. They would be jealous of the few seconds of intense feeling that would course through him as he fell to his demise. Patrin raced over to the struggling couple. He seized Morgan's hand and tried to peel it off Perrin's arm, but she was too strong. She grinned wickedly up at him. Perrin was only a metre from the drop-off.
Don't do it,
Patrin yelled.
He's terrified.
He'd never liked Perrin. No one could grow up with Carla Orr as their mother and turn out normal, but the young man didn't deserve to be put through terror, not knowing if he was living his final moments. Morgan gave a grunt as she shoved Perrin away from her. He stumbled backward. She giggled like a child as, eyes round and mouth agape, he tumbled over the edge. Patrin leapt and reached out, blindly swiping through the air. His hand smacked into something solid, and he gripped it, fingers digging in for dear life. He'd caught Patrin's arm, but he couldn't hold on to the platform. The edge was smooth and curved. He slid forward on his belly, the weight of the other man dragging him down. The only way to save himself was to let go. He couldn't release his hold. In a split second he would be falling to the surface, along with Carla Orr's odious offspring. But then strong hands grasped his waist, halting his slide.
Not so fast, Patrin, said Arthur. You are not going flying today. Your mother would never let me hear the end of it.
Chapter 5. From his standing position, Arthur had managed to gain traction on the platform with his feet, dragging Patrin and then Perrin to safety. Carla hugged her son, though listlessly. Morgan didn't even look contrite. Merlin gave his trademark smirk. The third alien didn't even seem to have registered the event. Her expression remained neutral.
Was that the last of the trials you set us, Merlin? Patrin asked. Were you in cahoots with Morgan, figuring out a prank to play? Wait, don't bother answering. I don't care. I demand you send me to Earth immediately. I thought it would be fun to learn about your planet and another intelligent species, but I hate it here. You're half crazy. What am I saying? You're fully crazy. You don't have anything to teach me. I want to go home. Humans do not dictate our actions, Merlin retorted. You listen and you obey. That is all. If you don't send me back, I'll just refuse to do anything. You won't get any more entertainment out of me. I could put an end to your life. At this very instant, I could remove the modification that allows you to survive in this rarefied atmosphere. You would asphyxiate in minutes. Then do it. I won't be your plaything any longer.
Morgan pouted. But your beloved mother would miss you so much if you never returned. She is missing you right now, you know.
Mam would understand. She wouldn't want me to give up my dignity and self-respect. She taught me my own worth. You're only saying that to manipulate me anyway. You want to feed off my despair like the parasite you are. Send me back to Earth, and Arthur too. Patrin, the king said gently, I am not sure I should return to our world, or that I want to. What?
He stared into Arthur's eyes. The king was serious.
What do you mean? Of course you have to return to Earth with me. What else could you do?
But his friend's features remained grave, and for several moments he was silent. Dreams of going home to Westby Eye with Arthur melted in Patrin's mind. Images of the two of them riding through forests, of the king teaching him woodcraft, of listening to tales of olden times. Everything was fading like foam from waves on a beach.
It seems to me,
Arthur finally said,
that these creatures who have tortured humans for so long are also in torment. I would like to find a way to help them, if not for their own sake, then to prevent other peoples from enduring the experiences of humanity.
Ha! Merlin burst out.
The arrogance!
I would like to hear what the oldest human has to say, said the nameless alien, her youthful brow wrinkling.
I have learned much since I was awoken in this new age of humankind,
Arthur explained.
I have learned that the stars are hundreds of thousands of worlds existing in the night sky, and they are unimaginably old. I have also learned that many of these worlds may sustain intelligent living beings, like and yet unlike humans.
He turned his kind, patient eyes to the anonymous alien.
It may be that somewhere among these worlds and civilizations lies the answer to your predicament. There could be beings even older than yourselves, creatures you have not yet encountered, who know how to give you the peace of a final ending. I propose that Merlin and I travel the stars to look for this answer. I yearn to see the miracles awaiting within the great expanse, and the strange people who live within it.
Arthur faced Merlin.
What do you say, old friend? I care not for the final task you had in mind for us, but we had many exciting and daring adventures together once. Perhaps, over time, we can recapture the engagement and camaraderie of those moments. Perhaps one day you may even look upon me as your equal. I am willing to devote my life to this quest.
But Arthur, Patrin pleaded, unwilling to let go of this man he'd grown to love.
You're a Briton. We need you. Our country is at peace and will hopefully be so for a long time to come. It will hurt me sorely for us to part, but you have a family awaiting you, and eventually children of your own. Your world is familiar to you. It is your home, but it is not my home. My world faded from existence long ago and will never return. Therefore, I would like to seek out a new life and a worthy cause. This one, which has presented itself by many circuitous, meandering paths, seems fated to be mine. You can't!
Patrin thrust the heels of his hands into his eyes and his chest tightened.
I'll miss you if you go,
he murmured, struggling to stay in control of his emotions.
And I will miss you too, deeply. Delight in the sweet sorrow, my friend. These poor creatures cannot feel it, nor any of the other emotions that make us what we are.
Morgan had wandered away, as if disinterested. The nameless alien said, I have no objection to your scheme. Though we have searched long for an escape from our fate, the galaxy is vast. An answer may exist somewhere out there in the expanse of space. A pause fell. Patrin's heart seemed to cease beating. He was on the verge of being torn from and at the same time returned to the people he loved. Carla Orr took her chance. One eye on Morgan, who stood at a little distance, gazing out into the mist. She whispered to Merlin fiercely and jabbed a finger at Patrin.
If you're returning him to Earth, send me and Perrin too.
No! Morgan had overheard. She came striding back. These two are mine, and I'm keeping them. She glared at Carla. You're staying here, you ungrateful bitch. You begged me to let you stay, and that's what's happening. I thought I was going to die with the rest of them. The situation's different now. I've changed my mind. Well, I haven't. If Earth is off limits, I need something to amuse myself with, and you and your precious son are it. Carla clenched her fists and appeared about to slap Morgan. The scene was descending into chaos. Who knew what stunt Morgan would pull next? Patrin swallowed.
Arthur, if that's what you want to do, you must do it. But I have to go home to Mam and Kayla. I understand. Merlin, give me your answer. Will you journey with me through the galaxy, seeking an end to your people's torment? And if your answer is yes, will you transport this young man back to his family?
Merlin lifted a knuckle to his lips, and his dark-eyed gaze flicked between Patrin and Arthur.
I suppose I don't have anything to lose.
He lifted a hand.
Wait!
Patrin exclaimed. This was it. There wasn't even going to be time to say goodbye. Merlin hooded his eyes.
It's now or never, young man. No!
Carla spat.
Me too! Send me back too!
She gripped Patrin's arm, as if she might be dragged back to Earth with him. He peeled her hand off, pushed her away, and grabbed Arthur into a hug, saying thickly,
I was honoured to know you, my king, and I you, my faithful squire.
Arthur replied, grasping him tightly.
Tell the Britons, if they need me again, I will return.
Say hi to Talon for me, Morgan snickered. She was holding on to Carla by her hair. If she's still around. Patrin took a breath. The light had changed. Cool, moist air, rich with woodland scents, hit him. Deep green grass stood beneath his feet, and trees rose to the sky. Merlin had transported him. He was on Earth. He could have been in any temperate forest, but he knew this was Westby Eye. He could feel it. He was home. The end. This has been UPSHOT, Star Legend Book 7, written and narrated by J.J. Green. For more J.J. Green books, visit jjgreenauthor.com.